Today is the fourth Sunday of Matthew, and on this day we read from Matthew chapter 8. There's a parallel of today's story also in Luke chapter 7, and it's the healing of the centurion's servant. There's something unique about this miracle that we read about today. There's only 2 times in the New Testament where it says that Jesus marveled. Jesus marveled. The word in Greek is thavmazo, to marvel, to wonder, to be in awe, to be amazed, it could be translated. 2 times Jesus was amazed. So that's something I think that should interest us. What amazes Jesus? The first time is in Mark chapter 6, verse 7, where it says that Jesus was amazed by the unbelief and lack of faith in Nazareth, his hometown. The other time that Jesus was amazed is the only one that's positive. And this one is in today's gospel. He is amazed at the centurion's faith. He marvels at it. He stands in awe at the centurion's faith. So what is it about this faith that amazes Jesus so much? I'd like to point out 2 things. There are 2 elements. One is the great humility of the centurion. The second is his firm conviction that God can do what is humanly impossible. These are the 2 elements I would suggest amaze Jesus today. So the story starts out, Jesus has entered the small seaside village of Capernaum. And there is in that village a garrison of Roman soldiers. Now remember, Israel is occupied by the Roman army. This is something similar to the 400 years of slavery that the Greeks experienced under the thumb of the Turks. The Jews were in a similar situation under the thumb of the Romans. Oppressive taxation, soldiers in their land, occupying their land. An officer, a low-level officer like the centurion would have had the power of life and death. He had the duty to keep order for the Romans there and make sure taxes were collected, and he was allowed to do anything necessary to make that happen, including killing people. So he was a powerful man. It tells us in Luke's account, it gives us a few extra details. It says that he was a beneficiary to the synagogue, that he had helped the Jews build a synagogue, and some of the Jewish elders had come to Jesus on his behalf because the man was too humble to go himself. So he asked his Jewish elders to go for him. So this man was a pagan. He was an idolater, but according to Luke, he had become interested to some extent in Judaism. And he would obviously, if he was helping build the synagogue and going to the synagogue like many Gentiles who were called God-fearers, they had become interested in Judaism. They were listening to the Old Testament scriptures. And this man, the centurion, recognized something that the Jews didn't. The Jews, who were the sons of the kingdom, as it says at the end of the gospel reading today, they were the children of Abraham. They had the true faith. The true God had revealed himself to them. And yet, they didn't recognize Jesus. Who recognizes Jesus? The centurion. So what happens? Jesus enters the Capernaum, where there's a garrison of Roman soldiers, because Capernaum was on the seaside of the Sea of Galilee, where there was fishing, where there was trade and fishing. And also it was near the border with Gentile lands to the east. So it was another trading post. So a Roman garrison was there to keep order and make sure taxes were collected when all this trading was being done. So the Roman centurion goes to Jesus and he asks him to cure his servant. Luke tells us that it was a beloved servant. So we see that this centurion has compassion on his servants. He loves this servant, and he asks Jesus to heal him because he seems to be paralyzed. And as soon as the centurion asks Jesus to do this, Jesus, of course, has mercy. Even though this is a Roman oppressor, this is somebody who could kill Jesus with a snap of his fingers. This is someone who inspired terror and fear among the Jews. But Jesus, out of his mercy, seeing the centurion's faith, he says, I will come and heal him. But then we see the first part of the centurion's faith, the humility. How does the centurion respond to this? Jesus says he'll come and heal him. And the man objects. He says, Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. We may recognize this phrase because it's in the pre-communion prayers. We say, Lord, I'm not worthy to have you come under the roof of my soul. It's a confession of humility, of our lowliness compared to God's exalted magnificence. So this is what the centurion says, because he recognizes Jesus. Now remember the power imbalance here. Here's a man who's an officer in charge of this area, who has the power of life and death, and Jesus, to the human eyes, is a Jewish peasant. He's a homeless peasant. And here comes this man with authority asking Jesus to heal his servant and saying even, I'm not worthy to have you come under the roof of my house. But he continues, only speak the word and my servant will be healed. So this idolater, this pagan Roman, an officer of an occupying army, says this to Jesus. Now you can imagine the disciples were probably shocked. How can a man of this authority say this to Jesus, a Jew, an occupied people? This is the humility of the centurion, because it's not possible, brothers and sisters, to come to a true faith, the kind of faith that amazes Jesus, without humility, without this kind of humility. Faith presupposes a kind of trust in someone other than ourselves. So if we believe that we are the smartest and we can do everything and everything is in our power, then what do we need God for? This is not faith, certainly not the faith of the centurion, who recognizes his own limitedness. Even though he has all this worldly power, he knows that he is limited in comparison to Jesus. And so he puts his trust in Jesus. We can't say, I believe in God, and yet trust ourselves more than God. That's not faith. That's belief. The kind of belief that James in his epistle in the New Testament tells us is the kind of belief that even the demons have. The demons know that God exists. Just to believe that God exists is nothing. The demons know this, James say, and they tremble. They're afraid of God. But it doesn't mean that they submit to him. It doesn't mean that they obey him. It doesn't mean that they recognize their own weakness in comparison to God. No, they exalt themselves. They exalt the evil one. So faith is more than just belief. Faith is this humility before God, that he is greater than us. So the centurion continues, for I am also a man under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my slave, do this, and the slave does it. So the centurion knows that he is a powerful man, but he doesn't lord this over Jesus. He could, in this kind of power dynamic, have simply told Jesus, you will do this. You will come to my house, and you will do what I say. And Jesus would have been compelled under the law to do that. But instead, the centurion has this kind of humility. He knows he's powerful, but he knows that Jesus is more powerful. He recognizes who Jesus is, even though the Jews to whom the true God had been revealed did not recognize it. The centurion humbles himself before the Creator. The second aspect that I'd like to point out is the faith in the humanly impossible. So the centurion says, I'm unworthy for you to come into my house, but you can do the miracle from afar. Just say the word and he will be healed. This is the centurion's belief. Now, how is this logical? That a man could simply say a word and someone else in the distance who's suffering from paralysis will instantly be healed. Humanly, this is impossible, but the centurion's faith, the faith that amazes Jesus, thinks that it's possible, believes it's possible, knows it's possible, that God can do anything he wants if he's really God. That God is all-powerful. He doesn't waver in doubt. How many times do we, even though we know God is all-powerful, God can do all things, but when he doesn't answer our prayers right away, we begin to doubt, can he really do this? Will he really do this? This is not what the faith of the centurion was about. The centurion knew that Jesus could do this. He had absolute faith and trust in Jesus and in the humanly impossible. This is characteristic of real faith. That Jesus, God, can do anything for us. He is all powerful. But we must believe. We must have faith in this. So faith, therefore, is to accept the humanly impossible as possible with God. And so what does Jesus say immediately after this? He says, when Jesus heard him, he marveled. Thavmazo. He was amazed. And he said to those who follow him, truly I say to you, not even in Israel have I found such faith. This is a terrible condemnation of the lack of faith that he had found in Israel. The other time that he was amazed, back in Mark 6:7, when he was amazed at their lack of faith and their disbelief. And then Jesus goes on to say at the end of today's reading that many will come from east and west, many non-Jews, many idolaters, pagans, Gentiles, like this Roman centurion. Many of them will come into the kingdom of God, and many of the sons of the kingdom, the Jews, will be cast out. What an amazing thing to say. For the Jews, this was inconceivable. God owed them. They were entitled, in their opinion, to God's protection. But Jesus says, no, that's not the case. That if we have the faith of the centurion, then we will be admitted into the kingdom. So, my brothers and sisters, these are the two aspects of the faith that I would call us to try to emulate today. To be humble, to recognize God's power, that he can do all things. To not waver in our doubt, but to believe that by his word, anything can happen. And I would say, too, to take a lesson from the Israelites today that received this terrible condemnation from Jesus. Let us not fall into that same category. The Israelites knew the true God. The true God had been revealed to them. They had the scriptures in front of them. Jesus, God himself, had been revealed as love incarnate in front of them and walked in their midst, and yet they didn't believe. Their faith was deficient. Let us not do the same thing. We who have been given the true faith, whose God has revealed himself to us in his fullness in his holy church, let us not make the same mistake. Let us not close our hearts and our souls to those who are outside, who have true faith. God is all-powerful. He can bring people into his church in many ways. He calls them. He draws them to himself through his fishermen, as we just sang in the Apologetian of our church. Let's not forget this. This God whom our fathers passed down to us, the true God, do we believe that he has the power to do anything? So, my beloved brothers and sisters, the Lord demonstrates constantly that we are not saved because we say we are Christians, like the Jews said that they were Jews and thought they were entitled to salvation. But like the centurion, those invited to eat the banquet, the Lord's banquet, will be those who approach with sincere faith and humility. So saying that we follow Jesus will not guarantee us at a place at the table. Only the true humility and faith of the centurion. May we emulate him. Amen.